Good morning, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here this morning with you again. Welcome. I think I know most of you. My name is Francesca Rosso. I'm coordinating the activities of ETF on skills demand analysis, and also with my colleague Cristiana, we coordinate this Skills Lab network of experts. It's really nice to see many known people around the table. And this is one of the activities that we organize to share knowledge, experiences, tools on skills demand analysis. And it's a pleasure today to have the colleagues from SkillLab, sorry, with us, Simon Schmidt and the other colleagues that you will meet in the next couple of hours. Before we start, I just wanted to give a couple of information, general information. This event takes place in the context of the ETF campaign on digital skills. We will also have another webinar organized next week on the 26th of June, where we will discuss about emerging skills needs and the link to the digital skills in different countries. That will take place next week, 26th of June in the morning. We will also, you have also received an invitation, or application was open for participation to our yearly live event of the network. That will take place in October here in Torino, and this year it will be a special event because we are joining forces with the ITC ILO, and we will discuss about the colors of economy, which is a bit of a new entry point, I think, an innovative entry point into the discussion about the future of skills and the future of work at global level. So thank you for those who have applied. You have already received last week a notification of those people who have been selected. Unfortunately, it was a very highly selective procedure. We received a very big number of applications, but those who have not been selected in this first round, just be reassured you are in a reserve list, and if we manage to have more scholarship available, we will immediately contact you. So that was on the live event. And last but not least, we will launch soon a LinkedIn group because we have seen that LinkedIn is probably one of the most used tools. It was also expressed as a need by many of you to have a place on social media, and particularly on LinkedIn, where we can exchange information, documents, and we can really have a place, a fora to really exchange. So we will launch the group very soon. You will also receive a notification, and you will be able, of course, to join the group. And of course, you will also be invited to contribute to the group itself by sharing your own work, activities, and so on. So these were the main three elements that I wanted to share with you before we start today's meeting. And passing to the real focus of today, as I mentioned, I'm very grateful to the colleagues from SkillLab for joining us today and for taking these next 2 hours of their very busy time to share with the network members what they are doing to use AI and digital tools to better understand skill needs, and also doing a skill profiling of workers. In fact, an anecdote how ETF got to know SkillLab, because as you know, our initiative on skills demand is called SkillLab, and I still remember a few years ago, Simon reached out and say, well, we have a very similar name. It means probably that we have something in common. We are probably working on the same issues, and there may be some synergies, and we could join efforts and forces with the objective to deliver better skills to people. So that's how we got to know each other a few years ago, and thanks Simon for being proactive, because that turned out to be a very successful cooperation and partnership. And today we will have, as I say, these 2 hours to really discuss with Simon and with the other colleagues from the team about their initiatives. I think that using digital tools and AI to leverage intelligence and to do better matching is really a very important element of the work that we carry out across countries and in organizations. I was discussing this morning, and we are discussing constantly at the ETF how to make it happen. It's very difficult to embed AI into organizations. It's difficult to embed AI into funds as well, because there is resistance, because there is a huge change also in mindset to be made. But what I say all the time, that we basically have no other option. We have digital tools which are like growing around us, and as organization, as countries, as stakeholders, we cannot do without them. So the issue is not if we want to adapt digital tools and AI to make our work easier or smoother. The issue is how to make it, how to really use them in a way that can be supportive for the work we do and for the countries where we work. So without further ado, I want to pass the floor now to Simon Schmidt, who will briefly introduce the initiative Skills Lab, and then together with the colleagues Luder Veller, Rehab Gesmi, and Ritze van der Werf, and I'm really sorry if I don't pronounce your name in the perfect way, will take us through this new approach that they are implementing. We will also leave time for the discussion. It is very important for us that these peer learning events are taken as an opportunity to share knowledge, to share innovative tools, but also to directly discuss with people. And the colleagues from Skills Lab are kindly enough to be at our disposals today. So, Simon, I'll pass you the floor, and thanks again for your availability.
Yeah, thank you so much, Francesca, and thank you everybody for joining us. Always great to be with the European Training Foundation, who since I reached out to Francesca, and Francesca is very kind to say that I reminded her that our names are very similar. I think I accused her of theft of the name, is what really happened. But no, I'm just kidding. It's really great to work with the ETF, and it's really great to be here today to talk to you a little bit about how we use digital tools and artificial intelligence together with skill and occupation taxonomies to get a better idea of what skill demand out there in the market looks like, and how this comes together from creating what we call living taxonomies to using those living taxonomies to give more context to what is out there in terms of labor market data. I'm also very lucky to have with me today 3 colleagues, Rinse van der Werf, Luca Vella, and Rehab Gesmi. They've all been working very intimately on projects adapting, adopting, localizing, and using taxonomies to give more context to labor market information. How exactly we do that, who we are as a company, we'll get into that. But first of all, yes, thank you for joining us. And I'm going to start sharing my screen and get into sort of the heart of the presentation. I'm assuming everybody can see my screen. It looks as if that's the case. I see nodding. Perfect. So at SkillLab, our mission is really to connect people, education, and jobs using that universal language of skills. We do this in many, many different ways, but that's sort of at the core of everything we do. We're a social business, we're an impact business that works with organizations, governments, ministries of education, ministries of labor all around the world. And our main target is to empower employment, training, career services organizations to with technology to make labor markets more equitable, to provide better information about labor markets by focusing on what we call the universal language of skills. To that end, we've developed software, we've developed different technologies that come together as modular solutions to help our partners better understand the skills that people have, people's unique experiences, but also the skills that employers demand and the skills that education providers provide in the education market. So We use skills for people to create skill profiles and connect them to people, jobs, and education. But we also create a lot of information, labor market information around that. And how we do that, what our approach is, what our methodology and philosophy around that is, we'll get into over the next 2 hours. As I said, we work all over the world. We work in, I think, 45 different countries now with partners as diverse as the World Bank, ILO, EBRD, the government of Saudi Arabia, the government of Egypt, the State Employment Service of Ukraine, the Austrian Public Employment Service, the Norwegian Refugee Council, and all kinds of different organizations that have many different missions, many different goals, many different targets. And that's, I think it's important to point out that we work very with a very modular solution that really aims at supporting different use cases, but we're going to talk about a more specific use case today. We have a couple of guiding principles that sort of shape everything we do. One of them is that we want to be innovative because there's a feeling that what's currently out there in terms of labor market intermediation and labor market technology is not sufficient and is often not enough. We want to be multi-sided because our diagnosis of why labor markets aren't working to their best ability is often around issues of alignment and communication between different stakeholders in the labor market. So offering front ends or serving different stakeholders in the labor market is really important to us. And first and foremost, and very importantly, we want to be user-centric because you can have the greatest data model running in the back if people are not able to use your technology, to access your technology. That's not very helpful. A couple of words on how we use artificial intelligence, because I think that's a big topic, and I think there's a lot of risks in using AI around employment, around career guidance. So what we do is really build around making validated taxonomies accessible to people, employers, and education providers. And we do that not by making assumptions about what people have or what skills people have or what skills people may need, but by querying them, by asking them, and by making sure that any data that we have is user verified. And we'll get into a little bit more detail as to how we do this later on. But this is something that's very important to us, to be responsible in our use of AI and to make sure that in our goal of creating more equitable labor markets, we do not exacerbate, we do not make existing inequities worse. And I think artificial intelligence is a risky thing, or a risky thing in that regard. So we're very conscious, we're very cautious in the use of AI. Overall, the basic background that all of our technology runs on is our award-winning AI that organizes and makes large skill and occupation taxonomies accessible. So you have large taxonomies. I think in the context of ETF and in the context of our work, we would mostly be talking about ESCO, for example, so the European Classification of Skills, Competencies, Qualifications, and Occupations. You have about 14,000 skills, and if you show someone a list of 14,000 skills, it's very, very hard for them to make sense of it. So what our AI does is it organizes those 14,000 skills in a way that makes sense and in a way that makes it accessible to people. So that large list of skills becomes accessible by being organized in a way that is digestible to people. So essentially, people are led through a skill interview that creates verified skill data for people. So for the skills that people have, for the skills that employers demand, and for the skills that education providers provide in the market. We do not do this only in ESCO, but a lot of our work is in ESCO. So we're going to be using ESCO as an example, but I think very crucially, we will be very much talking about how to make ESCO work for different contexts and the importance of localizing taxonomies and making sure that taxonomies are living documents, not stale lists of skills. All right, a couple of words again on flexibility, on modularity. So this is sort of the technical background of how we build our solutions as a technical foundation, product components and solutions and different users. The solutions range from career guidance, career orientation, labor market entry, skill mobility, so labor market transitions, which would be green transition, digital transitions, skill passports, taxonomy creation. These are all different things that we do with different clients. I think we'll mostly focus on the last bit here, taxonomy creation, and how to use that taxonomy creation bit to create more reliable labor market demand data. So how to get analytics and insights out of better taxonomies. Coming to sort of the problem statement that this whole session will revolve around. So the problem statement is really, how do we determine what skills are in demand? So if we look at the labor market, there's a ton of employers out there in whatever country we are in. And on all of these different employers have different ideas of who they're hiring. They're hiring different folks, but it's from a sort of macro perspective, at least on the skill level, it's really opaque as to what skills employers are really asking for and what skills are really, from a more macro perspective, from a more whole of society perspective, in demand. There's a little quote from the International Labour Organization that we certainly believe has a lot of truth to it, that no single methodology that is currently used to get a sense of skill demand is currently generating enough knowledge by itself to get a good idea of what that looks like. So there's a need for the right mix of different models and different methodologies to gain a reliable overview of what skills demand actually looks like. Now we'll talk about a little bit about the three most common methods of estimating skill demand and where those shortcomings are, and then we'll talk a little bit about how we think our work around generating better skill and occupation taxonomies can help mend and help address some of these issues around the interoperability of these different methods. So to very crudely, I'm going right to left here, to very crudely sort of summarize the different methods. One is determining skills demand based on expert opinion. So essentially surveying or talking to different experts around what the skill demand looks like. That's a very nice thing to do. It can account for really broad trends. We mostly see this around issues of, let's say, what are the top digital skills that are in demand? And then you have a document from the World Economic Forum where 50 experts told you what skills are they're seeing as in demand. So it's good for sort of broad trends that societally shape things. It's good for foreseeable disruptions. Artificial intelligence, the advent of generative AI is another good example of this, where you have a lot of expert opinion on what this will do to sort of the skill composition of jobs and the skills that are in demand in the labor market. But it is reliant on expert opinion. It's often really focused on very specific drivers and misses a lot of other drivers that are not sort of megatrends. And if experts are giving their opinion on the demand for occupations, that demand for occupations is very statically tied to skills based on whatever skills experts think are within that one occupation. So there are some very, very clear weaknesses to this approach. The next one is determining skills demand through job postings. So this is something that's come up very recently with the advent of more broadly NLP, and folks like Lightcast, MZ are very advanced at doing this. So it essentially means you look at online job vacancy postings, you look at the text of those postings, and via natural language processing and semantic search and match, you tag the skills that are in that free text of that vacancy. The data that's used here is online job posting data, which in itself has some advantages and some weaknesses. But generally what it does well, it collects information straight from the source, so straight from employer demand. And it is updated regularly. So you get some very up-to-date, very recent information. However, there are some important data limitations that we'll talk about in a little bit more detail. And the methodology is quite untested because it's a more recent, a new form of labor market demand, skill demand analysis. Lastly, we have determining skills demand through occupation outlooks. This approach is really forecasting the employment change for occupation, and then by using taxonomies to map occupation to skills, you have an idea of what that change in occupation demand means for change in skill demand. So use this occupation-derived data from the taxonomies. The key benefits is this data is probably the most widely available. If in many cases where there's no skill level data available on demand, there is occupation level data available on demand. So via labor force surveys, you can also again use online job vacancy postings, for example, or the expert opinion. And the skills are the drawbacks is really that the skills are very statically tied to each occupation. So it wouldn't capture a change in skill demand within an occupation because that occupation is defined within the taxonomy. And in that, what we call the occupation skills matrix, so the transposition of this is an occupation and these are the skills that are in that occupation, that really takes a bit of time to adjust. I know ESCO updates is meant to update every 6 months, but it's probably a little bit less often than that. And there's a clear time lag between adjusting the skill content of occupations to the actual skills that workers are in that moment actually using within that occupation. Talking a little bit about the shortcomings. So what we talked about here is the important data limitations of skills demand through job postings. So with semantic search and match, determining the skills people have used or the skills that employers are looking for is a really difficult thing to do. And I think one of the main reasons for that is that job vacancies and resumes are not really meant to be an exhaustive list of skills that people have used or that people are looking for. So they're not detailed enough and they're not a really reliable source of skill data because, again, a vacancy is an employer posting a vacancy is as much advertising that vacancy. So it's a marketing document to a certain degree. And it's not always the best source of actually reliably informing you about what skills are being asked for in that occupation. For the taxonomy-based approach, that can work really well, but skills are statically tied to occupations. So skill and occupation taxonomies or ontologies rigidly define which skills are connected to which occupation. So most of these taxonomies are also expert created, so there's a little bit of that issue that you have with expert estimated demand analysis as well in the creation of taxonomies. So they may not necessarily be as up to date or may not have relevant skill data for all occupations. What we think is sort of a solution here is that by being better, by being more diligent, by creating taxonomies that are up to date, that are what we sometimes refer to as living taxonomies, skills data can bring these taxonomies to life. So if you have better information about what skills are within each occupation, you can address a lot of the weaknesses, a lot of the shortcomings of all three of these different approaches. So by actually knowing, okay, these are the skills that farm managers in this instance are actually using. This is what we see in the market. This is what skill surveys tell us. This is what employers tell us these people need. You have a much better idea, a much more up-to-date idea of the skills content of that occupation. So, and that is not only relevant for this approach of determining skills demand through occupation outlooks, but even if you're looking at determining skills demand through job postings, if you're able to categorize those job postings by occupation, and you have really good data on what skills are part of that occupation, you do not need to rely on the free text, and you can use NLP. You can use natural language processing to categorize categorize vacancy postings into occupations and pull online job vacancies in. Same for expert opinion. If you have a good taxonomy and experts can tell you what occupations they see trends for, you're better able to transpose that occupation forecast or that occupation expert opinion onto that level of skills. Very crucially, the other thing that taxonomies allows you to use all three of these methodologies at the same time because you're talking the same all of a sudden you're using the same language, you're using the same data standard that across determining skills demand through occupation outlooks. So by looking at labor force surveys, for example, or job postings or expert opinion. If all of these three different methodologies are using the same data standard, you can combine them and use all that information to get a better idea of what skill demand looks like. So you're not limited to just one of these methodologies, but you can use all of these methodologies at the same time. So you have easy to use data that you can use, widely available data. That widely available data from occupation outlooks is no longer statically tied. The skills are no longer statically tied to each occupation, but are dynamically updated for each occupation. You can pull skill information from the source, not through a proxy, and you have access to new data from job postings. And you sort of safeguard against the data limitations and the untested methodology by combining it with other methods. Finally, for the expert opinion, you can consult expert opinion, and you can consult expert opinion using that same logic of asking experts, but of having reliable data that is interoperable with these other inputs as well. So you get more robust results as to what demand actually looks like. So for us, we talk about reliable data a lot. We talk about robust data a lot. And our way to get to reliable data is user verification. So user verification for us means that people tell us what skills they're using in their jobs. Employers tell us what skills they're looking for certain occupations. And to a certain degree, this is a little bit less in scope for this conversation, but education providers tell us what skills they're teaching, what skills they're providing to the labor market. So for us, this works by creating front ends, but I spoke previously about multi-sided systems. This is that multi-sided system where all of the stakeholders in the labor market have a front end to create and consume data about the labor market. So for people, whether it's job seekers, employees, students, you can capture skills from standardized taxonomies. So we developed this front end. It's a mobile application that most people use on their mobile device that can work as a skill survey application, but also as a career guidance application. And people capture their skills and create their skill profile using those skills from standardized taxonomies. All of this works through this artificial intelligence-based interview. And we end up with a really, really granular profile of what people have done, and not just what people have done, but connecting the skills that people have to occupations they have worked in. So you don't just get an idea of person X has all of these skills, but person X has these 30 skills that they acquired as a digital designer, and these 20 skills that they acquired as a graphic designer. So you get a little bit of a better idea of the skill content of these occupations as well. We do the same with employers, and there's different ways of doing this, but whether it's through sectoral skills councils, through surveys, but you can survey employers on their hiring needs using that standardized taxonomy and get standardized data to understand what occupations they're demanding, but also what skills the occupations they are demanding contain. So you really get to capture employer input and skill demand, but also on the skill content of occupations, which then makes all of that interoperability and updating of taxonomy possible. The same is true for education and training providers, but I'll sort of skip through this because I think it's slightly out of scope for the skill demand analysis bit. And finally, as governments, as the sort of actor on top, whether that's a Ministry of Education, whether that's a body concerned with setting with national occupational standards, whatever it may be, you get access to all of this input from job seekers, employers, and education providers to understand, to update your taxonomy, create a living taxonomy, yes, but to also have ideas of what these different trends look like, and have a better idea of what you can do actively to intervene in the labor market to fill gaps and create more harmonious, more aligned labor markets. So how do we do this? So we talk a little bit about the methodology that we're using here. So in order to create, in order to use occupational and skill taxonomies for skills intelligence and for skill demand analysis, you first have to create those occupational and skill taxonomies. So we support governments in the creation or adaptation of national skill and occupation taxonomies, national occupational standards with input on all of these different aspects, but we're mostly going to focus on sort of that skill occupation matrix here. But the creation of a starting point for a taxonomy is really important. And in many cases, we use ESCO for this, but we also have used we used ONET or other local taxonomies. Luca will talk about the Dutch taxonomies, competent NL a little bit. But then once you've created that taxonomy, and often, I think in many cases, this is a little bit where the work with the taxonomy stops or stalls a little bit. For us, it's important that the taxonomy is actually used. So we build a lot of tools on top of that taxonomy that allows people to actually work with it. So whether it's through skill surveying, skill profiling, whether it's through career guidance, whether it's through labor market intelligence, we want people to access and use that taxonomy, ideally via our tools, but in any way they want or can, to collect that real life data about what people are doing and what skills people actually are using in their jobs, what skills employers are actually demanding, and to create more input and create a feedback loop with that taxonomy. Then we get to the part where maintaining and updating that taxonomy is really important. So there's real-time analytics and insights from the different use cases has to be used in order to update and maintain that taxonomy as often as possible to create that data-driven feedback loop that makes sure that taxonomies are not a statically tied list of skills and occupations, but are a real-world the best possible real-world representation of what skills are demanded in which occupation, because that makes all of this other work around skills demand analysis a lot easier. Let me hand over to my colleague Riyab here to talk really about that first step about creating and localizing taxonomies. Actually, should we pause for question? I don't see the time. We have 36 minutes. If there are any questions now,
yeah.
Yeah, if there are any questions right
Simon.
now, we should maybe pause for questions.
We can hear. We have a question in our chat, Simon.
Yes.
Also, what are taxonomies used for occupations, ISCO, ESCO, or did you create another?
So it really depends, right? Like taxonomies are a very personal choice for countries. So in some cases we use ESCO. So for example, in Ukraine, we work with the Ukrainian version of ESCO. Thank you to the ETF for being a big part of that translation. In Saudi Arabia, for example, we use an adopted version of ESCO that we call USOC. So a localized version of ESCO. So it really depends. Like in some countries, in Austria, we work with BIS, so the Austrian taxonomy. We're a small companies. We're a small company from the Netherlands, right? Like we're not going to impose on a country which taxonomy they are going to use. So we are very flexible there. But what we think is important that whatever taxonomy you choose, whether you want to use ONET or ESCO as a starting point, whether you already have developed your own taxonomy, is that you localize it and that you make sure that it fits, that it's the best possible representation of your labor market.
There's another question. Is there any relation to the taxonomy and the International Standard Occupational Code?
So that's ISCO, right? Yeah, so ESCO is built on ISCO. So ESCO uses the same occupational logic that ISCO does. Many taxonomies do. So there's usually you can map the taxonomy level of the occupation level of a taxonomy back to ISCO.
Yeah, and the final question is about the taxonomy in relation to the skills. So what are taxonomies you use for skills? ESCO or something else?
I think the answer is very much the same. We usually start with if there is a local taxonomy, we use the local taxonomy. If there is not a local taxonomy, we usually recommend using either ESCO or ONAT as a starting point and then adopting and adapting for that local context. So generally, we do not have a strong preference. We use ESCO a lot simply because it's available in 28 different languages, and because there's a lot of, if you're working within the EU or in the European neighborhood, it makes a lot of sense. If, for example, currently considering a project in Armenia where ESCO is currently being translated into Armenian. So if ESCO is available in the local language, we would likely use ESCO. So, but it's not our choice. It's almost never our choice what the starting point is. We make recommendations, and we would recommend using an existing skill taxonomy as a starting point. But what that taxonomy is, we have very little input on, because that's very much a political decision where with many different factors play a role. So that's not something that we can decide.
We have another question about OSCA. It was mentioned before in chat, the system that was designed in Estonia, as far as I remember from previous messages. So the question is, did you use this OSCA system?
I think we've developed most of our technology before OSCA was a thing, so we have not used OSCA.
Seems that for now we don't have more questions. Thank you, Simon. We will have the chance to hear from you later.
Yes.
We will have the case, and of course during the questions and answers session. But now I propose we go further with the colleagues Luker Weller and Richard Gesmi for another presentation and the case on localizing existing taxonomies. So please, we wait for Luker and Richard. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, very well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having us. Simon, are we ready? Yes. Okay, thank you. All right, thank you so much. So as Simon mentioned and presented, it's crucial to have a standardized living taxonomy. However, a one-size-fits-all approach is often ineffective, as each region or each country has a unique economic and cultural educational landscapes that must be considered in these taxonomies. And from that perspective, we have developed a methodology to localize taxonomies, especially for countries that are still working on developing their taxonomy or do not have a skills taxonomy yet. Yeah, I will guide you through or walk you through the methodology that we've developed, or the strategic steps that we've developed. And they are involved in creating a taxonomy or localizing an existing one, to really ensure that it aligns with the specific cultural and labor market needs. So in this context, we will particularly use ESCO as a default taxonomy, and localize that to Saudi Arabia. So it's very important that we first start, and always the cornerstone of every work is analysis, or an initial assessment. So we sort of conduct a thorough analysis of the country's current labor market and skills needs, and then we engage stakeholders, and they're usually a broad range of stakeholders, including government agencies, educational institutions, and other relevant organizations in the labor market. And once that assessment is done, we move to mapping, or doing this process that we call mapping, and it's mapping ESCO, the European taxonomy, to the local context. And the reason that, especially for Saudi Arabia, we used this methodology or this strategy is because they do not have a skills taxonomy yet. They do have an occupation taxonomy, as in the labor market is standardized, and they do have a dichotomy of occupations. They are just not linked in any way to skills, which, as we've discussed, is very important for the labor market. So we do this process that we call mapping, and it's basically linking ESCO skills to the existing occupations in the country. And to do that, the first thing that we do is reviewing this occupation taxonomy. We need to understand the structure, the categories, the entries within this existing taxonomy, and then compare that to our default taxonomy. In this case, it's ESCO. We also do something that we called identification of gaps, and we try to identify which categories are missing from either taxonomy, so either from the Saudi occupation taxonomy or from ESCO. Also, we try to identify any irrelevant entries or categories in the context, and add any additional categories or skills that are needed. And then we move, that's the first step, is the initial mapping, and then we move to a step called customization and localization, where we take basically this review, this identification and the mapping itself, and then we culturally adapt it. In this step, we really modify the terminology and descriptions to reflect local language, culture, and context. As Simon mentioned, ESCO actually is available in 28 languages, and Arabic is one of the languages. However, Arabic is it's very regional, so it differs from one country to another. So it's very important to also adapt the particular language to the region or the country's specific needs. This ensures that the taxonomy is understandable and relevant to the local stakeholders, so the people who are actually going to use this taxonomy. We also do industry-specific adjustments. And we basically make sure that the taxonomy aligns with the specific needs of the key local industries. It may involve adding new skills, competencies, or occupations that are not covered by ESCO. A very brief example of this is a lot of the oil industry. It's a very comprehensive, very important industry in Saudi Arabia. So we need to pay a little bit more attention to that. Another a key sector is religious tourism, for example, or like pilgrimage in general. Is a very important sector in Saudi Arabia. So that needs to also be adapted from ESCO. The previous slide, Simon? Yes. So once that's done, we move to something called validating and testing. We do a pilot testing where we take this taxonomy that we have developed or localized from an existing one, and implement the pilot version of this localized taxonomy in a control environment to test its relevance and effectiveness. Once that's implemented, we collect feedback from users and stakeholders on the practicality and comprehensiveness of the localized taxonomy. We basically make it available for a specific sample test of users, and we get their feedback if they think the phrasing of certain skills are off, if they think that skills make sense or not. So it's a continuous feedback loop. We collect feedback from there and enhance the taxonomy according to that feedback. Once that is established as well, we move on to integration and implementation. The integration really is working with the government bodies to integrate this localized taxonomies into their national or regional frameworks. And especially here, we're talking about educational frameworks and training frameworks, because we really want to create this environment or ecosystem where all these different components and different frameworks are linked through skills. We really focus on educational alignment. So we need to make sure that educational and training programs are aligned with the localized taxonomy that we just created to facilitate the development of relevant skills, because again, these pillars, they take from each other. So certain needs that are in the labor market have to be addressed from a training perspective and from an educational perspective, and we need to make sure that all these pillars are aligned. Then this phase is always going to be there. It's a continuous improvement. So we always do monitoring and evaluation. It's basically establishing a mechanism for ongoing monitoring and evaluation of the taxonomy, of the taxonomy's effectiveness in labor market needs. Again, it has to be a living taxonomy. It should not be a static taxonomy that does not change. It needs to adapt to the labor market needs, and we also establish a mechanism for regular updates. So we make continuous updates of the taxonomy to reflect any changes in the technology or the labor market and emerging industries. Yes, and that is the methodology that we developed. I'm going to talk a bit on a technical level and go through sort of a step-by-step process on how exactly we did this. We did leverage AI to do this process. As I'll briefly discuss, it is quite a challenging process to do if one would do it manually, obviously. So we did use or leverage technology to really help us effectively do this. So we go through phases to achieve our output, and the first phase is always data exploration. As we covered, we really need to get to know the taxonomy that we're working with, and also where we want to go or what output we want to get to. So it's first phase always about data exploration. In this case, we really inspected the occupation taxonomy Saudi Arabia already had. Obviously, we do have quite some knowledge working with ESCO because we have used it quite a bit. So we really tried to see the differences between these taxonomies, and yeah, that was phase one. Once that's done, phase two is leveraging AI, or what we call mapping through AI. So in this phase, we used our own AI model. It is a model that we have developed through our expertise working with different taxonomies. And basically, we used this model to try to compare the Saudi occupations and then the ESCO occupations. And the way to do that is we calculated something using called semantic similarity. And what we do is basically embed text, and embedding means transforming text into these vectors and calculating the distance between vectors, and that would give us a similarity score. And that we use the similarity score to basically define a threshold a threshold to use to classify certain matches. So anything that is above a certain threshold or under a certain threshold would be classified as a different type of match, as we will see in phase 3. So in this phase, after calculating the semantic similarity and comparing, which basically compares how similar different occupations are in both taxonomies, we try to do something that is called refinement of model. So we basically tell the model you need to do better, or we try to make it do better. The first task is always to filter occupations with low similarity score. Let's say, so the score can go from 0 to 100, and let's say that we have established a similarity score of 50%. So anything that is underneath 50% has to be filtered out, meaning that that's not a good enough comparison or a good enough similarity, and we need to filter that out and rerun things again until we get a better similarity score. We also verify the matches that we have already established. And then we classify these matches into different categories. And these are an exact match, a narrow match, a close match, broad, or a new match. And these are very important because depending on these categories, the skills will be linked. So, for example, if we have an exact match between two occupations from both taxonomies, it means that the skills will perfectly match each occupation. So let's say, for example, a statistician in a Saudi occupation, and then we also have a statistician in ESCO. So these two occupations, sorry, Simon, if you go back. Yeah. So these two occupations will have will be labeled as an exact match, meaning that the skills linked to the ESCO occupation would match perfectly the description or the Saudi occupation. All of the other occupations require modification in the skills. A close match means that these occupations are closely related, but there are differences. A new match, for example, meaning that there is actually no match in ESCO for this occupation, and it needs to be, an expert needs to look at it and then assign the appropriate skills for this new match. And that's phase 4. What I just described is linking ESCO to ESCO skills to USOC, depending on the match type. And then the final phase is always expert and stakeholders review. So this is, we get expert, labor market expert or subject matter experts to really review the work that has been done by the AI model. And then we also get our stakeholders and the users or the potential users of the taxonomy, so they can really give feedback on that. And phase 5 is a reiterative process. It's again, a continuous improvement process, so it happens quite often. All right. So yeah, basically the output of the entire process that we have developed that is based on the ESCO framework is a fully tailored Saudi taxonomy that meets the unique cultural and labor market needs of Saudi Arabia. And the key features of our taxonomy is that is culturally adapted. So we have customized the terminology and descriptions to fit the Saudi context. We also made industry-specific adjustments, so it reflects the specificities of the Saudi labor market, and it's dynamic, as in it's a living taxonomy, so it is continuously updated to stay aligned with the labor market and the technological enhancement or advancements. Importantly, this taxonomy should not be looked at as a static tool. It's really a living, dynamic taxonomy. So we have integrated it with the national educational framework. And this alignment, as I said, really facilitates the development of relevant skills among students and job seekers in the future. And the same thing has also been done with the training programs. So we linked existing training programs to the skills or the localized taxonomy we've just created. Going through this process, there were some challenges and definitely some lessons that we have learned. One of the major challenges is that we have faces data availability and quality. So comprehensive and high quality local data, especially local labor market data, can be difficult to collect at times. Also, cultural nuances. Adapting the taxonomy to fit cultural context was a bit challenging at times. And the way that we have, or the way that we try to overcome that is engaging local experts to provide insights and feedback during the process, the entire process that I described. Also, technical integration, integrating this new taxonomy with existing frameworks, like the educational framework or the training framework, can be a bit tricky at times to really adapt all the different elements with each other. But definitely the important lessons that we have learned is the importance of local expertise. As I mentioned, they were really invaluable during the entire process in giving feedback on the cultural nuances, the language used, also, and the technical integration, really giving feedback on the technicality and the categories of the different frameworks. So it's very important to really always engage local experts. And then also the continuous feedback loop. It's really important to establish that to maintain a high quality and always enhance the efficiency of the taxonomy. Also flexibility and adaptability. We always need to be flexible and willing to change as we go through the process. And then leveraging technology. Again, this would not be possible in a reasonable time frame if it would be done manually without any intervention from AI, for example. So it's very important to use or leverage technology, especially AI, to enhance the efficiency and the quality of the process. Right. So, yeah, sorry, Simon, you're not sharing anymore. I still cannot see your screen, but I'm not sure if I'm the only one.
We also don't see it yet. Yeah.
Okay.
Hello.
Oh, I am clicking on resume share, but it's not. It says my screen sharing is paused. Give me 1 second. Now it's stopped. Share again.
Now we see it.
We can see it.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you. There we go. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Zoom. Who knows?
All right, thanks. Okay, so the approach that we have used for developing this localized or Saudi-specific taxonomy from the ESCO taxonomy is highly flexible and can be adapted to any other region. It is sort of a universal solution for local skill development, and it can be adapted and it can be scalable to ensure that diverse cultural and labor market needs can be met effectively. And it is highly replicable. You just need to take, it's very highly replicable. It's designed to be flexible and customizable to meet diverse cultural and labor market needs. Do you have any questions so far? That is it.
Yeah, thank you, Rihab. In fact, we have several questions in our chat.
Yeah.
So I might start with the order. So we have a question how to incorporate those academic thinkings into the existing labor market situation. So I'm just reading. We have foreign workers coming every day. They do not speak the language, going directly to the job assignments. And how do we measure or direct their skills and knowledge, which has to fit into the market needs? An additional problem is with the local unemployed people, while employers claim they do not have needed skills to perform. Is it true? It is true mass at market going on. Who and how can make it all work? It is a little bit long question, but to summarize, there is a need for the existing situation at the labor market, which has also some migrants, some foreign workers, and people who do not have that kind of pre-assessment of their skills before they enter the labor market and employment. So how we can use those artificial intelligence systems to help us?
I'll redirect this question to Simon. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I can take this question. So yes, while this work on taxonomies, etc., seems very academic, the reason why we did this, we didn't do this to create taxonomy. The actual project in Saudi Arabia is to create a comprehensive career guidance platform. So it's about career guidance and connecting people to the labor market by helping them create a skill profile and connect that skill profile to education and employment opportunities. So I think that speaks directly to this question, right? Like whether it's foreign workers coming in who have trouble translating their experiences into a new labor market context, whether it's employers being dissatisfied with what they perceive as a not qualified or insufficiently qualified workforce. This creating a better taxonomy does not by itself solve that. But for us, it's a precondition to create the services and products that address these actual issues. So this is not academic thinking for its own sake. The purpose of this is to create products and services that actually support people in their learning and employment journeys, support employers in getting the workforce they need, and support education and training providers in developing the right programs and courses to address skill gaps, to address the learning and development needs of people and employers.
Thank you, Simon. Another question is related to tracking the new forms of work. So in fact, the question is, can we use this model to track new forms of work, which are mostly about independent or freelance workers?
Yeah, again, this sort of depends. In theory, yes, very much so, right? Like whether it's platform work or freelance or whatever else it might be, the skill and occupation taxonomies can still be a useful tool to track that. The question is a bit when we talk about we're going to talk about, so for example, sectoral skills councils and national occupational standards in a bit, how to incorporate platform work and new forms of work into those sort of old methods of distributing skill survey tools, etc. That becomes a little bit more tricky, but it's certainly not it's certainly not something that is impossible. You just need to find a different methodology for distribution and maintenance of information and of keeping in contact with those platform workers or independent workers.
And maybe I can add to that, Simon, also that when we do kind of skill surveying of workers, right, we're not sticking maybe to one occupation. We're leaving them very much open to combine all kinds of maybe occupation hints about what they did in that job. So we're quite flexible in creating descriptions of past work experiences. And with that description, we start doing the skill interview. So it's not really tied to one occupation from a taxonomy. Right, so we are quite flexible in finding new kind of combinations of work or occupations that people have been doing in the past. And that's also maybe a way to get these kind of new forms of work as a category in our services so that we collect skills on them.
Thank you, Rins. We have now another question. Can you provide some more details on the linking process to educational qualifications and training programs? And of course, a positive impression about the presentation.
Rehab?
Sorry, I'm trying to go through the questions so I can read them. All right.
There's a couple of different, we could talk about it, how we did it specifically for Saudi Arabia, but in general, we like to incorporate education and training programs and providers in using that same skill taxonomy, because that makes sort of the work of the education and training sector comparable, and gives us the needed information to figure out how well the education sector is currently closing that skill gap, if there's an identified skill gap. But directly linking to educational qualifications, certifications, and training programs was something we did in Saudi Arabia. So I think you can maybe talk about how we did that as a little bit.
Yeah. Again, we really use the what we call the universal language of skills to bridge the gap, or to try to link these different components. So the educational framework that they have in a certain country, and then the training programs. From a technical perspective, it's a lot of, again, AI based approaches. So what we do is that we take the educational framework and extract basically skills from each program. And then we link, obviously there you'll have that link between educational programs and then skills. And then we use that link to power our app later on. And the same thing is done for trainings. We have a training program, and it's provided with a description. It's provided with a certain requirements, and we use that to extract relevant skills. And these skills are contained within the developed taxonomy. And then, so we have all of these components operating in the same environment, and they all have the same underlying basis, which is the skills.
Thank you. We have another question. I'm curious to hear the challenges stemming from dichotomy between the national workforce versus foreign labor, who constitute around 76% of total workforce of private sector in Saudi Arabia. Also, thinking that the national workforce is not generally willing to work in many kinds of jobs and sectors, low skilled, low paid, but only in public administration. What was the implications for your work?
I can start by answering that, but Simon and Ritze, please jump in. Feel free to jump in whenever you want. So basically, while developing this taxonomy, we always, while developing taxonomies in general, or working with taxonomies in general, we try to be as inclusive as we can. But it's also important to bear in mind that while developing the taxonomies, these dichotomies are not really reflected in the taxonomy itself. So the taxonomy, especially speaking in the Saudi context, it's not, so it's based on the general labor market. So that's taken into account the national workforce as well as the foreign labor. So it's the public and private sectors together. It really reflects what jobs or what occupations are available generally in the entire labor market. So the taxonomy itself is sort of removed a bit from that level. It's more of a higher level abstraction of the jobs available, if that makes any sense. So that doesn't really, it's not really reflected in the taxonomy itself. I think that is more, or what you're talking, or what your point is more on a lower level, or the application of the taxonomy later, when we're actually talking about the use of the taxonomy, how it is actually used on the ground. I'm not sure if that answers your question or not.
Yeah, just to add to that, and sorry, I lost connection for a second. I think there's a limited set of challenges that the taxonomy itself can address. I think sort of dichotomies within the workforce, whether it's the like guest laborers or whatever it might be, is probably not within the scope of a taxonomy to fix. However, I think it is worth pointing out that having a taxonomy and sort of giving people the ability to verify, track informally acquired skills, skills acquired abroad, is helpful for people, whether they're returning to their home country or whether they want to work abroad. So that it gives a broader possibility of people documenting their skills and using them in other contexts, whether that is coming to Saudi Arabia, going back to the home country and contributing there. But obviously Saudi Arabia is a very specific labor market that's very different from other labor markets in terms of guest laborers and all those sorts of issues. But yeah, from a taxonomy perspective itself and from a skill demand perspective, it's quite difficult. It's quite difficult to draw distinctions there.
Yeah, maybe to add to that, one of the services or one of the kind of modular solutions that we can provide is around skill mobility. So, for example, we make it easy to create a skill profile for a worker in a certain language. And then through ESCO, we can create kind of a CV that you would send to an employer in a different language, basically because you have this skill taxonomy, which is ESCO translated in 28 countries. But that's specifically on the service level, which you would build on top of the taxonomies, right? So I think that's also what Simon mentioned.
Thank you. Thank you. For now, there's no more questions. So I propose to go on with another presentation from Rinse van der Werf. It is use case on national occupational standards. So floor is yours, Rinse.
Slavica and Rinse, just a second, just before moving to the next presentation, I will propose to take a family picture. So whoever wishes, just switch on your cameras and we take a picture and then we move on the next presentation. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you,
Rinse,
Cristiana.
the floor is yours.
Yes.
Thank you.
Let me know if you can see my screen.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Maybe the same problem as before. It's black
Yeah, I have to stop sharing and then reshare. Otherwise, it doesn't like what I'm doing.
So looking at time,
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah,
It is okay now.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so looking at time, we switched to the NOS. We also had a few slides on competent NL, which is actually a new taxonomy being developed in the Netherlands. But I think there's a lot of overlap with what we did in Saudi Arabia when it comes to localizing taxonomies. And so we decided to skip that. But if anyone is really interested in that, we would be happy to connect outside of the workshop on that topic.
it will also be, and we'll share the presentation afterwards, and the competent NL slide will be in the presentation that we share afterwards.
Perfect. Yeah. So I think the kind of threat is that competent is much more kind of building a new taxonomy within a country based on a lot of the methods that Simon already presented earlier. Whereas the localization of ESCO into USOC was really like a localization. National occupation standard is yet another kind of really important development in the creation of taxonomies. I think looking at the group, the ETF, I think occupation standards, looking at qualification profiles, informing education, what type of trainings are needed. I think this is a big topic also in your domain. We've for the last year have been starting to work on this with our clients. Again, the same as with the localization of ESCO, based on practical requests from our clients. They needed support with this. But you will see here, as from the definition of national occupation standards, it's much about capturing kind of the demands in the workplace, together with specification of underlying knowledge and skills that are needed to basically do your job. And they express what an individual needs to know, to do and understand in order to carry out a particular job role or function. So in contrast to what we discussed before, we view this as much more a bottom-up approach. This is always connected to the sectoral skill councils groups of workers organizing themselves in those councils as a means to express, okay, this is what is our demand, and this is what we would like skilled workers to of course cover that demand as employers who are working in those sectoral councils. Now, if you go to the next slide, Simon. So first a little bit on skills and all those definitions. I mean, let's start with the definition we had before, what workers need to know, do and understand, need to do, know and understand. There's a lot of different concepts that you can use to express that. So when you talk about competencies, really, there's a lot of different definitions going around, but basically things that you actually really need to do in a job, right? You might need to replace a broken pipe. In order to do that, you need technical skills. So you need to be capable in welding, for example, or as it is in ESCO, joining parts using soldering, welding, or brazing techniques. That's actually what you need to be able to do to deliver that activity within a job. In order to do that, you need underlying knowledge. So you need knowledge about tools and materials for welding. And then you can also argue that when you do this, you go to a certain job, you need some planning and organizing transversal skills also from ESCO, because you need to bring the right materials and you need to make an appointment with people to start fixing that pipe. So a lot of different definitions about skills that we encounter. And this is particularly relevant because when we engage with sectoral skill councils, we view all these things. We see all those definitions. We see subtle differences between how sectors view this. We see different names for the same type of skills. We see different groupings of skills. We encounter all kinds of different ways to try to capture kind of the demand within a sector, and that's an issue for us because if you go to the next slide, the reasons for creating those national occupation standards are quite broad, and all those kinds of needs and where are they used, they actually lead to subtly different requirements on how you would express kind of your employer needs in such a national occupation standard. So to support direct curriculum development, I think that's a really big driver in creating NOSes, right? It's the sector expressing this is what people need to do, this is the knowledge they need to have, and we'd like the training providers to provide the training so that we get qualified staff that is able to do this job. So curriculum development is an important driver in NOS. It's also sometimes why you see this being driven from education a little bit more than labor, whereas these skills and occupation taxonomies are typically driven from labor or more statistics angle. So the top one is an important driver. Of course, direct professional development, again, is also on training and getting people up to the level where you would need them as an employer. But also to facilitate the recruitment process for employers. So that's already a little bit more like kind of labor market matching, right? So who's a good candidate, who's available, what skills do they have, how far away are they maybe from being okay for this job, what do I expect in terms of skills, so what can I teach myself. I don't expect all the skills to be there from a worker, right? I always take some onboarding and training into account. So again, an important driver creating those NOSes. To set quality standards within sectors and occupations related to validation, right? The qualification, certifications. To facilitate the validation of informal and non-formal learning is an interesting one. So people that have been working in the job, how do I actually express that they have a certain set of skills and maybe even recognize that they kind of have a education degree already based on the fact that they've been working in this sector. You also need this underlying definition of what you expect someone to do, what you expect to be part of a certain education degree. And if someone is able to demonstrate that, you might award that degree. But also to gain insights in skill needs and capacity at national level. I think this is closer to what Simon already discussed previously. When you start collecting this data and you've structured this data according to a NOS, right, you can start reporting on it, and you can identify maybe shortages in suitable employees, and can use that to inform all kinds of government measures and programs to tackle those kind of gaps between what's on offer and demand, and then to promote mobility of workforce. This is typically cross-sectoral mobility, but sometimes also things like career paths within a sector. But that's, again, an important driver for the creation of certain NOSes. So I think from these varying use cases, our conclusion is that there's also a different kind of requirement on the skill definition and the occupation definitions that you would need. And that's kind of a problem that we are dealing with when you create a NOS, and also what we encounter where we inspect kind of the quality and the usability and the usefulness of all kinds of NOSes being created. For some use cases, they're fine. For other use cases, they definitely will not work. So that's when we come in and we try to help. This one I will do very quickly. It is the traditional process of developing a NOS. I think if you know a little bit about this, then this will be no surprise. It has also a lot of overlap with what Rehab already presented earlier. So research and analysis, identification of existing NOSes. It's never the case that you start basically from scratch, right? There's a long history of creating information for training, but what type of skills you want to be taught for the people within your sector. Varying levels of quality we see, right? Some sectors are very well equipped to create NOSes themselves. Others are really, really struggling. And that's kind of when we get pulled in and asked to see what we can do to help. The industry validation and the approval, I think I will skip over that here for now. This it's really, mostly kind of a manual process. The research and the analysis, and also based on the existing NOSes and development of the NOS, and that's kind of where we support, and we will show you in the next screen a little bit how we do that. If you can go to the next one. So we have two kind of bit technical slides here, but hopefully they clarify a little bit how we combine this world of taxonomies that we've been discussing previously. So for example, ESCO, which has occupations and skills, and how we combine that with the practical things that are happening on the sectoral level. So an important thing is that, and there were some questions already about it, is that our approach is always about try to work within the context of an international standard. So adopt, for example, ISCO, which you see here up to the 4th level. On the 5th level, you see ESCO, which is the occupation level. That's where in ESCO you have all the skills connected. And our advice is then, okay, when you look at sectors and you look at specializations of occupations, because sometimes you need to get more fine-grained, like we've seen in some sectors in Saudi as well. You give the possibility to create job roles, which are actually kind of specializations of those occupations, which is our advice. It's not always what happens. Sometimes they start fresh and they create their own definitions of what an occupation is in a sector. Our advice is always to keep that very well connected to an international standard or localized national standard. But then there's freedom on the sectoral level to create all kinds of subsectors. You see job families within sectors. So there's all kinds of freedom that you can give to sectors expressing their need while still maintaining the connection to some taxonomy, occupation level, overarching definition, which helps with cross-sector things, right? If every sector creates their own skill definitions, there will be very hard to implement cross-sector skill mobility of workers, basically. So the next slide here, it gets even more complex because now we're looking at skills. So again, on the top, you see kind of the overall taxonomy skill structure, which we kind of call the framework typically, which needs to be kind of localized. That's what Rehab talked about. Then ideally you have a national taxonomy of occupations with skills connected to it. And then the interesting part is, okay, how do you connect that to what the sector's needs are? We have an approach here where we do this kind of in 2 phases. Also, again, practically driven. We need services that work in sectors, right? So that's our interest. We are a software company that provides services to end users. Sectors need to recognize their own definitions. So in phase 1, when there's already existing NOSes, we kind of link them into this general framework. to support with some of the kind of cross-sector use cases, and at the same time still give a lot of freedom for sectors to define kind of their own skills. They sometimes have very specific needs in occupations like the oil and gas that Riyab already mentioned before. I mean, it would be hard-pressed to express all the needs in the oil and gas sector in Saudi using ESCO skills. But we still advocate using this ESCO framework and work underneath it and then create your own specific needs on that level. We can link that then. So we sometimes do this. We actively help using the AI techniques that also Riyab already mentioned before. So we can connect existing skill output and NOS output to a national framework. And phase 2 is also that, and that's something that we only just started kind of informing some of those sectors how they can create better NOSes. Like I said before, some sectors, when we look at the output, it's pretty high level, it's pretty good. Other sectors are really struggling with creating this and probably could be helped with some more guidance, for example, based on what ESCO has in terms of skills. So this is kind of our value add. This is what we do at SkillLab, and yeah, it would be interesting to see if there's any question on this, because connecting kind of the sector specific with the general framework is it's a problem, right? It's a challenge. We don't present us as having the ultimate solution for this. This is work. This is hard work, right? But ultimately, it's about combining very valuable sources, which is like national top-down frameworks, with bottom-up driven specifications of sectoral needs, whatever the way that is connected. And kind of bringing those worlds together is actually what is needed to get valuable service going. Otherwise, you will get the training exactly as the sector specified it. You will do the training, and the output of it is not connected to any other sector where you might also benefit from using those skills. So you need that shared kind of connection. So this is kind of our approach to this. Look at it from a perspective of a NOS framework. So a starting point for NOS creation, or sometimes a framework where you want NOSes to be kind of connected into. Then we do broad surveying, and I think there will be a little bit more on that later. So again, we collect all kinds of data on this, and we combine that data, that surveying data, together with our AI analysis of those NOSes and taxonomies. In phase 1, we just link things, right? We don't kind of force this framework onto sectors. And for some sectors, that's fine. For other sectors, they really need some guidelines on how to create valuable NOSes. So that's kind of phase 2. Then we support with tools for updates and validation. So we have taxonomy editors and all kinds of software. Again, from a practical perspective, we needed to build that to get good career orientation services going, to get good labor market mediation services going. So we had to build those kind of tools, but they can also be used to support with updates and validations. And then integrate NOS into online services. I think that's for us really the key thing. That's also where our tools come in. We see a lot of quality NOSes as PDFs on website. That's great if you can download the PDF and maybe create a training based on that information. But we need this in online, digital, ideally living kind of way of being used, and then profiting from that feedback loop that we already mentioned on the use of it.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think one point that's really important to mention is that the main point, so what we're trying to show with the creation of the NOS is, it's another input point, it's another data, it's a point where we get more input from employer stakeholders, from employees in some cases, as to what skills are being used in specific occupations. In some cases, that data is more granular than occupations and goes down to sort of sectorally specific versions of that occupation. But it's a really important input tool to create or to keep taxonomies alive and living, and to keep them updated based on a continuous feedback loop with sectoral skills councils, maybe updating the information every 6 months or so. So that's a really important piece, not just on how we support NOS creation, but in how NOS creation and maintenance also helps us maintaining and updating skill and occupation taxonomies to build all of these other services that are ultimately culminating in what we'll talk about next. But I think let's pause for questions for a second, right?
Thank you, Simon. So far, we don't have any questions in chat, but I invite you all to ask questions live if you wish. Otherwise, I invite Simon to provide us another use case related to the labor market information systems.
Yes, so this is sort of the final version of what we call a comprehensive skills-first labor market information system. And so the conceptual framework of this is developed by the World Bank, and we helped develop this with the World Bank a little bit further. So as I mentioned in the beginning, I think one of our basic theses around why labor markets fail and why labor markets do not work as well as they possibly could is because all of the different labor market actors are disconnected. And that goes from job seekers, workers, students, refugees and migrants, whatever sort of subgroup of people you want to talk about, to employers, to different government agencies, training institutions. There's very little, or there's not enough alignment, communication, and interconnection between these different labor market actors. We think that sort of the three nodes that are missing are skill-based career guidance, so that students, job seekers, workers, etc., have access to better information about the labor market. In order to have better information about the labor market intelligence and skill-based labor market intelligence is really central, and that's mainly what we're talking about here with creating taxonomies and using those taxonomies to get access to better skill demand data. And then there's job matching, which is mostly a function that's in most countries is fulfilled by sort of the public employment service or by other employment intermediaries. But it's using that information that you have about the skills of people and about the skill requirements of jobs to put one and one together and make sure that people find the right job or the right education to pursue whatever they want to pursue in their careers. So that's our basic thesis, and that's what we build all of the services around. And we've learned that in order to have good labor market intelligence and provide good information to students, job seekers, workers, employers, whoever it may be, working with a good taxonomy is going to be really essential. And building any analysis around skill supply and skill demand on that standardized data will make any other service delivery afterwards and the building of services and software solutions possible and easier. So what does it mean for us to create connected skills-first labor markets? It means that all of these different labor market actors are able to connect and adopt what we call a skills-first approach. But what it really means is that all these different stakeholders, from people to employers to employment services and education providers, speak the same language. It's very hard to communicate with someone when they speak a different language, and that's what we talked about. Well, Rinse mentioned when sectoral skills councils create national occupational standards with their own skill terms, where they just say like, oh, we need someone to do this and this and this, but it's not in a standardized language. Education providers may struggle to understand exactly what they mean. So will people who are then told to acquire those skills. So using taxonomies as a tool for interconnectedness between these different stakeholders is really important. So what does this look like in practice? And all of these different front ends, from people to employment services to employers to education and training providers and governments, all of these different front ends perpetually create data that update the taxonomies and refresh the taxonomies. So for job seekers, for unemployed people, they're able to capture their skills from standardized taxonomies, create their own skill profile to learn more about what they are capable of doing. They can use that profile to explore different careers, jobs, education, and training pathways that may help them make better career decisions by also accessing all of that labor market information that we had talked about. Finally, they can generate tailored CVs and output their skills as sort of a skill passport to have a better chance or to present themselves better in applying for a job. Employment services or employment intermediaries get access to all of that information that job seekers create. So the individual they're supporting, they understand the skills that they have, and they also understand how those individual skills are matching to job and education. So in the same way that the individual job seeker has better information, the employment service provider, the the employment service counselor has better information as to how to support that individual. This also enables digital and remote service delivery, so you no longer have to come into an office. We're now working in Ukraine with the state employment service, especially in Donetsk. This has been really, really crucial because there are no offices anymore. So digital and remote service delivery is the only way to go. We also provide a lot of other tools around scheduling and operational tools and managing cases and managing job seekers within their job seeking journey that are really helpful to employment services. For employers, I think many employers talk about skills first hiring, talk about adopting a skill-based approach a lot, but are really struggling with actually doing it. So creating skill-based vacancies and actually articulating in a standardized language what skills you need for jobs is really important. We then provide tools like a reverse search where employers have access to a pool of candidates that want to share their profile with employers that they can then anonymously, the job seekers remain anonymous, but employers can contact job seekers who are a good skill fit for their vacancies. Education and training providers understand their courses as not just a course that provides something, but courses that provide specific skills. This helps them, education and training providers, better understand their own curriculum, adapt their curriculum to match into skill gaps, and immediately, if job seekers have completed the course, they can transfer their skills into their profile immediately. Finally, and I think we've talked about this a little bit, and I think that's sort of the headline, for governments, all of this data that's created at the job seeker, employment service, employer, and education and training provider level helps understand the skill supply and demand, enable policymaking based on the real life experience, real lived experience of workers and employers, and in the age of a new industrial policy, build a future-ready workforce that has the skills to do the things that need to be done, whether it's transitioning to a green economy, ensuring that we have that there is work in the age of AI, all those different things. Understanding skill supply and demand and understanding skill supply and demand on a granular level is going to be really, really important. All of this information also feeds back into the taxonomy, right? Like, so if you continuously collect information on what people are doing, what employers are looking for, you're able to update and maintain that taxonomy and keep it up to date to create that living taxonomy that then again enables job seekers and employment services and employers to provide better services, to better understand the labor market. So we're creating a virtuous circle of the users creating users, whether it's job seekers, employment services, employers, or education and training providers, providing input, but also having access to all of that information that others provide to better understand the labor market, to make better decisions within the labor market, and ultimately to make better decisions about their own career journey, and hopefully eliminating some of that slack in the labor market and some of those issues in the labor market that come from the disconnect between these different stakeholders. Yeah, let me pause here. I think we have how much time do we have left for questions? 20 minutes? Yeah, we have 20 minutes for
exactly.
questions.
Thank you, Simon. We are unfortunately limited with time, and it seems that the topic is very attractive to all of us. So we have some 10 to 15 minutes for your comments, for your additional questions. We also have some questions in chat, but I invite all of you not only to ask questions, but share some of your experience, taking into account that we have in total, let's say, 15 minutes to talk. It seems that we might need additional session for this topic in the future. So yes, you are very welcome. We have the question about the tracer studies. So would be there a framework or a template that leads to an intelligent or smart tracer studies at this stage?
So we have not done any tracer studies, but since people in theory remain connected to the application and retain access to the application after going through, after creating their skill profile and going through their journey, in theory, you could do follow-up tracer studies. It's not connected. It depends on the availability of other data as well, like for example, employment data from the public employment service or whatever it might be. So we haven't done smart tracer studies yet, but it's certainly, because people retain access to the application, is something that would be feasible.
Thank you.
Maybe,
We have a comment
Slavica, can I just suggest if we ask the colleagues and members to ask their question directly so that they can also, introduce
Exactly,
themselves?
yes. We have a comment here, so invite Hedia to tell us, instead of writing in chat, about the e-portfolio.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Hedia from Tunisia. I would like to mention that the concept of e-portfolio may be a kind of connection between university, labor, and specification of competency. This concept was used at the beginning, was a challenge, let's say, in the Europe at the beginning of the, let's say, the year 2005, and unfortunately, it was, let's say, missed. However, I think that it should be reconsidered in this problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Hedia.
Yeah, and I think that's certainly, I think there's many, the e-portfolio concept, whether you call it a skills passport, a learner and employment record, whatever you might want to call it. I think that's actually, it's a useful concept to think about how to conceptualize people's past experiences and gain skills. So I think it's definitely a useful concept.
Thank you, Simon. Another question or comment from the members, or maybe to share some experience you have?
Maybe while colleagues are reflecting, because I think there was a very large number of information provided, and maybe people also need a bit of time to digest. One reflection that I also shared in the chat is one experience that we have had directly at the ETF, running different studies on the future of work, and of course using taxonomies. We have also used digital tools to scan patents and available literature data. So it's really a natural language model that we have applied. And then we have linked it to existing classification, namely ESCO and ONET. And when ESCO and ONET were not sufficient, we have also used additional sources, for instance, such as Wikipedia, to gather more information. But the issue that we have faced, all the time, is that there are so many new skills needs emerging in the market at very high speed that it's really difficult for classifications to keep track of this change. In May, we participated together with the ESCO team to the launch of the new ESCO version 1.2 release, which certainly is a huge step ahead. There has been the inclusion of many new skills, including green skills, for instance, and digital skills. But of course, the issue remains. So my reflection was about the fact that we, of course, have to look into classifications, and it's quite good that there are international comparable classification for the issues that you, Simon, and your colleagues have mentioned: mobility of workers, migration, and also the fact, for instance, platform work and so on. But on the other side, we also need to be flexible enough to accept that these classifications cannot be 100% complete, simply because the change is extremely rapid. So yes, I don't have actually a solution to this issue, but I think it's it's an element that we need to factor in when we do analysis and also when we deploy skills.
No, that's certainly true, Francesca. And I think currently the ESCO updates, I think, were meant to be every 6 months. I think it's closer to once a year at the moment. And they're really, really valuable. But I think one of the things that we're trying to do by collecting more data on how occupations are changing and how new skills are emerging is to cut that time to maybe every 3 months or so. So I think it's okay if occupations aren't always, there will always be a lag between a new technology emerging, people acquiring that skill actually being in demand in the labor market, right? Like if you talk about, I don't know, I think maybe the prompt engineering example is a little bit overused, but if you talk about that, for example, there's a ChatGPT came out, and then maybe 3 months later, it showed like that skill showed up as an occupational, as something that employers were demanding, and maybe another 3 months later, you would be able to, in the best case, include that in a taxonomy. It took a little bit longer with ESCO. I think it's in now, but it took maybe 1.5 years. So cutting that time in half or shorter, you'll always be a little bit behind, but I think that's usually fine as long as you keep that time a little bit shorter than it currently is.
Thank you. Another question, another comment.
Good morning, everybody. Sorry, Slavik, I didn't know how to raise my hand, so I'm just taking the floor like this.
I was also investigating if there any hands, but I didn't find it.
Yes. So thank you very much for this these very interesting presentations. My question is, we have been reasoning, I think, in mostly top-down, as you said, investigation of labor market and occupations. Now I'm thinking about a bottom-up, if like, process whereby we can use these very interesting findings in order to equip, empower, and reinforce of career guidance into vocational education and also higher education. Is it possible to do this? Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think that's very much the point, and I think that we probably should have talked about this a bit more, about how I think one of the things that we've noticed in our data collection and in our work is that in many cases, people actually performing the jobs and working in the jobs know a lot more about what skills are required for those jobs than maybe the hiring manager or an expert sitting somewhere. So combining all of these different sources of information, especially sort of on the ground, bottom-up data collection on people telling you, workers telling you what skills they actually use, employees telling you what skills they actually use, is going to be really crucial in capturing the real life requirements of jobs, not just what experts or employers might think, because I mean that's also important, but confirming that to sort of a 360-degree view on what skill requirements and what skill demand actually looks like, we think is really important.
Yeah, maybe I can add to that it's really also about the type of skill. So if it's very specific kind of technical skills that are relevant for kind of a bottom-up specification of a job role or of an occupation, then bottom-up is definitely the way to go. But we also see a lot of time spent in these sectoral skill councils on bottom-up way expressing what the transferal cross-sectoral skill needs are, right? A lot of time is spent on that as well, and we see that actually going top down, right? If you kind of classify the group of occupations a little bit in a certain kind of taxonomy occupation, that gives you already very much about general skill level, about transversal skills, right? So you don't need to go bottom up and ask everybody how much communication they do in the job, right? So it's really about combining those two approaches. Again, yeah, combining it with the use case and the service that you want to provide, what approach to take there.
Thank you, Rinse. I think we are very close to the end of the event. Thank you very much. It was a very attractive topic. Thank you for all presenters. Thank you for the members being very active and interested in those topics. And now at the end of the event, I would like to invite Francesca for a wrap-up session and to agree on the next sessions that we will organize very soon.
Thank you very much, Slavica, and thanks everybody. It was, as I said, extremely rich. So doing a summary, it's extremely difficult. But what I take from the session today are some very key important messages. Simon started with a slide saying, how can we understand what is the demand? That's the $1 million question. And I take also a methodological point that we keep repeating, but I think it's very important to say that no one tool can really provide you with the full picture of the situation, but we all have to use different tools that allow us to somehow get a picture which is close to the reality. And the time issue that we have been just discussing now is part of this discussion about being close to the reality. And maybe it's not even essential to have a full 100% picture, but it's important that we have the most out of it so that education authorities and stakeholders can really adapt their education and provision accordingly, or employment services, for instance, in their intermediation. Another point which I take as very important is the idea of the skills first approach. That's really extremely important, especially also for mobility, for recognition. And I think that this issue also of the e-portfolio or skills passport, as you want to call it, is a key element that emerges in the conversation. It is extremely important in a world which is highly mobile, if you want. It's really like where people transit from country to country, from job to job, from position to position. It is really important that skills are tracked and recognized so that they can also be used, with new employers. And that's particularly true, for instance, in the emerging new forms of work. As someone made an important question about platform economy, I think that's one increasing reality. You know very well that at European level, there has been a lot of discussion, and recently the European Parliament has has approved the new directive on platform work, where these issues are also mentioned. So not only the employment status, the algorithm management, but also the data protection, data of workers, and of course it links also to the skills development that people have inside these new forms of work. I think that I cannot add more to the richness of the conversation that was already, that was taking the last 2 hours. I really want to thank you, Simon, and all the colleagues from SkillLab for their availability. I think that your solution proves to be very effective when also applying international classification to local contexts. So there is this issue of comparability, but also application to specificity in the countries. Of course, the labor market in countries are very diverse. There were some comments in the chat which reflect the complexity of the labor market, with people coming to the market basically with no skills that are really needed by the employers. There was a comment from our colleague from Bosnia, which I very much agree with. But we need some system to try to simplify this complexity, knowing that we are really operating in a very complex environment. Thanks a lot. As I mentioned in the beginning, this was one of our peer learning activities. I open, of course, an open invitation to our members to propose other peer learning activities in case they have innovative methodology that they want to share with other members. I think this is a very important way of sharing knowledge and also sharing and spreading a culture of skills anticipation at global level, which is really the purpose, the very same purpose of this network. Again, please join us also next week. We will have this great new webinar on digital skills with many participants, including the Joint Research Center from the European Union and others coming to share their work. And so with that, I also thank Slavica for the moderation and all the colleagues that help in organizing today's event. I wish you a very nice continuation of the day, and thank you all for being with us. Thank you. Thanks a lot. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Bye.
much. Bye bye. Have a
Thank
nice
you.
day.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.